About 6 years ago, I made a few videos about creepy things in WoW, and I think it's about time I've updated those videos as well as add a few new things into the mix. So in this video, we'll be going over 10 creepy things, places, and stories from World of Warcraft. And at number 10, we have the various test subjects in Undercity. There is one experiment known as Tirisfal, who walks around the outer portion of Undercity and is kind of out of place, seeing as it's one of the few humans that walks around unabated, with a blindfold on, mind you. She has the title of Gerard's Mind Slave, so it's pretty obvious based on some context clues why she's allowed to walk around without problems. Basically, Tirisfal is the result of an experiment with Gerard Abernathy, who removed parts of her brain and stimulated other parts of her body. That way, he'd have the perfect worker who's basically used to transport items between him and Father Lancaster. She's also able to use gutter speak, the language for the undead race. The character's most likely a reference to Tirisfal from the Fabled series, who is known as a blind seer, although there aren't much similarities between the two characters other than the fact that they both have the same name and wear a blindfold. If you also head over to the Alchemist District, you'll see a couple of live Alliance subjects being tested on, where they routinely feed them new potions that turn them into all sorts of different animals, before exploding after being turned into a sheep. This again is supposed to be a reference to Warcraft 3, where clicking on a sheep repeatedly would cause them to explode. Although ignoring the context of the lighthearted reference, taking both of these things at face value makes it seem a lot darker than it was probably intended to be. You have a literal mind slave who was lobotomized walking around Undercity as a delivery person. Then you have live human experimentation going on downstairs where they're not even really trying to hide it, right next to the mutilated corpse of a male orc. And at number 9, we have the Secrets of Frog Island. Located off the coast of the Karazhan Wilds is a small little island which doesn't have any important NPCs or quests associated to it. And if you go up to the island, you'll see a whole bunch of warning signs on the coast, which simply has the image of a frog upside down in water. You can't click on the signs or anything, so it doesn't really give you any indication of what the warnings are for. And if you go into the island, you'll just see a whole bunch of frog critters, running around in groups of 4 as well as hanging out on the various protruding rocks. All in all, there are over 75 frog critters at any one time on the island, and they even have a pretty fast respawn rate. It seems like the perfect place to get the achievement Critter Kill Squad, an achievement for killing 50,000 critters with your guild, or one of the other personal achievements awarded for killing large numbers of critters. Although, the signs posted along the coast of the island were put there for a reason. If you spend too much time killing the frog critters, then you'll spawn the boss of the island, known as Croacon, who hops out of the ocean and just goes into the middle of the island, where he casts a single spell known as Frog Justice. This ability has a 100-yard range, hits everything regardless of line of sight, can never miss, and instantly kills any players who are affected by the ability. The frog itself is also immune to all damage and effects, including Mind Vision, a priest ability which has absolutely zero negative effects to the targets it's cast on. After he casts this one ability, then it just hops back into the ocean just as quick as it came. And at number 8, we have the Hidden Stories of Gadgetzan. In the deserts of Tanaris, there are a couple of tracks that lead out of Gadgetzan, and if you follow the tracks of any of them, they all lead to the gruesome deaths of whoever created those tracks. The first pair of tracks seems to be a group of people with a pack animal, and as they continue into the desert, it appears as if a fight broke out, where 3 of them die in whatever caused the altercation. Then one of the other adventurers continues on with their animal, only for the animal to die halfway along the journey, and the adventurer continues quite a ways into the desert, slowly losing some of his equipment as he gets further and further in. First losing his axe, then his shield, before finally collapsing and not being able to continue any further. Perhaps dying of exposure or to one of the many predator animals or thieves located in the desert. There is also another track leading out from Gadgetzan, this one not as long. It simply depicts a group heading out into the desert and then deciding pretty quickly that they want to turn back, although they don't quite make it and die on the return trip. Most likely whatever they ran into scared them enough to try to run back, although they didn't run very far before succumbing to whatever got them. And if you explore deeper into Tanaris, you'll even see an abandoned camp. Well, not really abandoned, as you can see the bodies of the previous occupants, as well as a couple of grave markers, which could indicate that a group got stuck in the middle of the desert, and they were probably there for a while, with some of them dying due to a lack of supplies or exposure, and the surviving members buried them and gave them grave markers, only for the rest of the party to eventually die as well, without receiving a proper burial. And at number 7, we have the hidden eyes of Darkshire in the Tirisfal Glades. This little secret is just a nice little bit of creepy ambiance to these two zones, where when you're walking along a path, you might notice some yellow eyes staring back at you from the bushes. But if you were to investigate, you'd see that there was nothing there. The zones themselves are supposed to be creepy on their own, so there's most likely not much more to the story about these eyes, other than just setting the mood. Although it is a pretty nice mood setter to look out for when you're questing through these two zones. And at number 6, we have a very well-known creepy Easter egg in WoW, known as the Karazhan Kypts. This is quite a famous piece of in-game information, where located in a blocked-off part of Karazhan is a crypt, with a whole bunch of bones and skeletons, potential graves, and of course, an underwater section with people hanging upside down. For the longest time, WoW players speculated what exactly the crypts were put into the game for, and in Legion, players were allowed to go down there for the first time, for a few artifact and other types of quest chains involving Karazhan. But it wasn't until 2018, when we got the WoW Diary book, that we finally got some concrete information on why the crypts were put into the game. Like many of the mysteries in WoW, there was a pretty simple explanation. You see, Karazhan was the first ever raid they designed in the game, and after they submitted the rough draft for it, they were told to make it even bigger, but weren't exactly given parameters on what that meant. So, they went to making Karazhan gigantic, with multiple levels and even a secret side underground level called the Hidden Wine Cellar and the Undead Catacombs. Although when they submitted this new design, they were told it was too big and to cut back. So they removed the wine cellar and undead catacombs and then redesigned the rest of the tower, which didn't actually make it into the game until the Burning Crusade expansion, despite the fact that it was the first ever raid that was worked on in the game's history. So the actual mystery behind the crypts was they were just cut for being too big, and they were meant to be part of the raid in some way. But since they completely redesigned the entire tower, and the crypts were cut before the redesign of the main raid, it just kind of got left in by mistake, and then blocked off so that no one could go down there, except for the few people who found ways to teleport behind the invisible door. And at number 5, we have the Erinys of the Darkmoon Faire. Located in a secret cave underneath a shipwreck off the coast of the Darkmoon Isle, you'll come into a room full of Blood Elf NPCs, who are all named Erinys. The NPCs don't really do anything, but are aggressive if you get too close to them, and the only other thing in the cave is a giant metal device towards the back of the room. One would assume these are a whole bunch of demons or something similar, but their actual origins are probably a little bit more sinister. If you kill one of the Erinys, they'll drop an item called the Ring of Broken Promises, which starts a quest that simply requires you to turn it in to the Darkmoon Faire denizen named Chester. Upon completing the quest, Chester will say, "Ah, I see you found my lovelies. Beautiful, aren't they? It's a shame the process drives them so insane. The ring is yours to keep, of course. Can you hear them whisper? Marvelous." You'll then be given a toy item called the Ring of Broken Promises, which allows your character to transform into one of the Blood Elf Erinys. So one can assume that Chester created these girls through whatever machine is in the same room as them, but we have no idea why he did it or what he did to them. If we go based on more of the name of Erinys, in Greek mythology, they were a pair of 3 sisters in the underworld who punished people specifically that committed the crime of killing their parents. And in one famous story, they drove a person named Erinys insane after he killed his mother because she killed his father. Although they don't care about context or how or why it happened, and punished him severely for it anyway. They can also be summoned by someone who swore vengeance on someone else, and would punish them while ignoring mitigating factors, which made them very feared in Greek mythology. In D&D, the Erinys are beautiful devils who are basically fallen angels, and carry out the rules of their masters. In some versions of Greek mythology, they're supposed to be very beautiful creatures as well, and that's especially true in their D&D counterparts, which would probably be why the ones in Warcraft are modeled after Blood Elves, as that's generally considered the most beautiful female race in the game at the time they were added, since this was all added to the game in Warlords of Draenor. Although why they went insane isn't really explained from their roots, and is most likely just directly involved with Chester turning them into whatever they are. Most likely twisting different humanoid creatures into the beings that become the Erinys. And the fact that they look like Blood Elves isn't really indicative of what their original race might once have been. They were just twisted and corrupted into this new form for Chester's pleasure. And at number 4, we have the Dungeon of Scholomance. The story behind how this dungeon became an undead-infested dark dungeon has got to be one of the darkest in all of World of Warcraft's lore. It starts off as a normal mansion to a rich family of the Baravs, who wanted to enjoy their wealth for eternity, and sold off their people to the Cult of the Damned in Kel'Thuzad. The transformation of the Manor to the dungeon is best explained through the quest chain known as the Butcher, told from the perspective of 2 of the servants who died in the dungeon. Over time, they knew the new occupants were not good news, and decided to hide in one of the many rooms in the mansion, only coming out at night in order to steal necessities to live. Every day, they would hear screams as people were being tortured upstairs for unknown reasons, until after 6 months they were eventually found. And, to quote part of the quest chain, "The undead surrounded us, constantly tormenting us with horrific acts of depravity. Finally, he came. He introduced himself as Dr. Thielin Krastanoff. We came to know him as the Butcher. We finally understood what the screams were from. The Butcher exposed us to pain that we did not know existed. He used us in countless experiments to devise a plague. The days turned to weeks. We would have died on the first day, had it not been for the cruel bastard keeping us alive through magical means. We feel nothing. Our souls remain here, in limbo. We are unable to leave until our remains are found, and spirits laid to rest." For a place literally used for live human experimentation, it's quite ironic that Hearthstone decided to turn it into a funny Hogwarts knockoff for one of their Hearthstone expansions, which I can't help but feel was entirely meant as a joke, based on how dark the origins of Scholomance really are.
Of course. Dear Magic, Scooby vows to stay right and true. Oh, Scholomance, we love you.
And at number 3, we have the secret of the horrific visions. If you actually take time to explore some parts of the horrific visions, you'll notice a couple of creepy little Easter eggs which are very appropriate for a video like this. If during the Stormwind portion you decide to try to go into the Stormwind Keep, Wrathion will stop you and tell you this is one vision that he doesn't want to know the outcome of, implying that he doesn't want to see what cruel fate had in store for Anduin. Also in Stormwind, you'll notice a couple of apples on the floor in places, and if you decide to kick into the apples, it will grow spider legs and scurry back to its original location. Each time you kick the apple, it gives you a 1% chance to obtain a toy. So if you kick it 100 times, you'll get a guaranteed drop at the end of the vision. And also, in the Orgrimmar version, located in one of the many cages throughout the city, you'll be able to find a very familiar person locked up, as you can find an exact duplicate of your character locked inside one of these cages, cowering and crying. Although, probably one of the more disturbing secrets is again located in Stormwind. When leaving the Cathedral District to the south, you'll see a cat named Tiddles who will whisper you, asking you to kill a nearby rat because he's just so hungry. If you attack the rat, it will yell, "Have mercy," and if you end up killing it, it will transform into a human, which Tiddles will then start to eat the corpse of. And at number 2, we have the Sludge Field zone in the Hillsbrad foothills. This was a little questing hub, where players were sent in to investigate Warden Stillwater, since he had stopped sending reports back to the Forsaken, and one of the supervisors sent to look in on the Sludge Fields went missing. Based on journal entries from one of the undeads you kill in the zone, we get a pretty good idea of what was going on in the Sludge Fields. Day 25. They incinerated our farms and made us watch. Construction begins tomorrow. Day 40. Construction on their plantation is nearly complete. This place resembles no farm or plantation that I've ever seen. Day 41. The warden of the plantation, Stillwater, arrived today. He lined all of us up and gave us medical examinations. Nobody knows what's going on. Day 45. We've started laboring in the sludge fields. They grow poisonous mushrooms in fetid water and muck. Day 50. I hear screams coming from the warden's manor. People are starting to disappear. Day 52. I overheard that some guards talking about the farmers, Ray, Getz, and Kalaba. Something terrible has happened to them. Of this I am certain. Day 60. Those of us that remain are scared for our lives. Some of the farmers claim to have seen ghouls running amok at night. Day 61. A strange turn of events today. A master apothecary from Terran Mill arrived. From a little information I'm able to gather, he is here to supervise the operations. Lydon is his name. Day 62. Master Apothecary Lydon was dragged away by Stillwater's guards. He was yelling and screaming that the Dark Lady would have Stillwater's head for this. What is he talking about, I wonder? Day 63. I saw them take away Burnside and Varrington last night. I can only assume that I'm next. The rest of the journal is full of incoherent scribbles. Basically, what was happening here was Stillwater was experimenting on Forsaken and humans in order to bind them to his will and make them undead slaves. Something the undead were still openly against at this time period. Although even the undead didn't really care what was going on to the human prisoners. During one of the quests for the zone, you're told to dig out some of the planted humans in the ground, and told to do the right thing. When you are given the option to either unbury them, or smash their heads in order to kill them, since their fate was basically to be turned into mindless ghouls anyway. It's one of the few quests in the game that allows you to pick the good or evil option. And if you pick the evil option, there will be an extra little dialogue for you that says, you might want to rethink your definition of right. And at number 1, we're going to have a little bit of story time to tell the story of a vanilla WoW quest chain known as The Legend of Stalvan, which is a quest chain all about uncovering the story of an undead named Stalvan Mistmantle. So, rather than retell the story of the quest chain, we will instead be going over the story itself, as it's an excellent piece of dark writing added to the game, which tells the story of a madman teacher who was a little bit too infatuated with one of his students. His story begins with a letter to one of his teachers. To the Honorable Headmaster Krillian, my former master, I write to you so that you might know what your apprentice has been doing of late. Paying heed to your advice, I sought to build my knowledge and wisdom through travel outside the gates of our beloved Stormwind. My journeys took me to many places, but I have decided to take up residence here in the lovely town of Moonbrook. The surrounding fields of Westfall are most beautiful as the harvest approaches. Within just a few days of my visit, I found myself tutoring the local children from the nearby farmlands. The lessons went so well that the town mayor commissioned me to run a school, and construction has begun on a new schoolhouse. From Silverpine to Stormwind, and now Moonbrook. Who would have guessed I would see so much of Azeroth? Warm regards, Stalvan Mistmantle. Now, it's interesting to note about all of these letters is that none of them were actually sent. And during the quest chain, you piece together all of these notes and letters that were found throughout different parts of Azeroth. Now, the first one details his life in Moonbrook, which did not end well for him, as the whole zone was razed by the orcs during the First War, and then was overtaken by the Defies Brotherhood after the rebuilding of Stormwind. So it seems as if Stalvan would have had a bright future ahead of him if it wasn't for the First War happening. His next letter is addressed to a nobleman, asking for a job to tutor his children. One assumes how he was able to obtain the job, seeing as the letter was never sent. But he probably just met him in person instead, or simply sent another letter. Dear noble sir, word of your need for a tutor for your children has traveled to me here in Goldshire, where I take up temporary residence in the Lion's Pride Inn. Due to the unfortunate state of events in the region, I was forced to abandon my post as headmaster of Moonbrook Schoolhouse. Please accept my application to serve as tutor for your offspring. Headmaster Krillian of the Academy can speak to you of my abilities if necessary. I shall travel to meet you in person when the winter rains subside and the roads are suitable for travel once again. Until then, Stalvan Mistmantle of Silverpine. In his next letter, he simply goes over the details of his job as a tutor to a noble family, and talks about two of his students. Giles, the boy, seems a bit rambunctious and will be a challenge to educate. However, the elder daughter, Tilua, seems exceptionally smart. I couldn't help but notice her captivating beauty as well. She is on the cusp of womanhood now. Supposedly, the Lord has arranged her marriage for next year. But I digress. This week I will accompany the family to their summer cottage near the Estavel lodging camp in Elwyn, close to the Redwitch Mountains. I hope to write more while there. It is here that we are introduced to Tilua. Stalvan seems normal at first, but as the letters continue, you can see that his infatuation grows and grows, based on the most mundane actions on Tilua's part, which he just took to the extremes as a sign of affection for him. Most strange and uncontrollable feelings. Never have I felt the way I did today. Whilst assisting Giles with his history lesson, Tilua was outside tending to the flower garden. After a few minutes, she came inside and placed a scarlet begonia in my open palm and smiled at me in such a way that my heart felt as though it was trembling within my chest. He has another letter which continues, most certain that she shares the same feelings for me now. She even placed her hand on mine this morning. When she smiles, her eyes light up like glittering diamonds. Unspoken words pass between us. I can feel her in my pounding heart and heated veins. This letter almost reads stalkerish in a way. He takes very innocent gestures as a sign of affection, and even admits that they haven't really talked very much, but asserts that there is an unspoken bond. They have conversations which don't need words because their feelings are getting across to each other, and this one-sided affection doesn't end well for him. Anger and fury, the likes of which I never knew existed. How dare she? As I was instructing Giles in the meaning of numbers, Tilua appeared before me with a suitor, holding hands in public nonetheless. What an uncouth young man. Rather than introduce me properly, Tilua simply said, "Oh, that's just my tutor, Uncle Stalvan. He's a nice old man." Old? At that word, my cheeks flushed with heat. I am but a few years older, and yet she betrays. It's important to note that at this point the family was actually traveling, most likely going to the home of the suitor, or for any number of reasons. Because they were on the road, no one was able to find out about what happened next. Downward spiral of despair. First she mocks me, and now she is engaged. The ungracious charlatan was pretending to love when truly she desired to hurt me all along. A black void lurks within me now, and it grows with each waking moment. The blood I shall spill pales in comparison to the tears I have shed. After this last letter, Stalvan murders both Tilua and her suitor, as well as the rest of the entire family. and no one knew who killed the traveling nobles for the longest time, until the player character doing this quest chain uncovers all these journal entries and pieces together a motive after all these years. After piecing together the final puzzle piece, you'll be told to visit Stalvan in Darkshire and put an end to the psychopath. They did update the quest with a cataclysm, but it's nowhere near as good as the classic version, which is why we will end this video off by only talking about the vanilla WoW version of this quest chain. The whole story is so different from everything else Blizzard puts in their games. It's not as creepy or as unsettling as probably some of the other stuff I talked about. Simply the story of a delusional psychopath who took everything the wrong way, and in a murderous rage killed an entire family, when really he wasn't even mocked. He just had a warped view on reality. Alright, and that's the video. This is kind of a remake of a video I made 6 years ago, taking bits and pieces from a couple of my other videos with a more creepy tinge to them, and I think only 2 or 3 of the items from this list were actually even in the original video, of which I find that original video very bad by my quality of standards today.